Hello and welcome to this webinar about efficient EPM and modern planning tool. My name is Jan Renman. I'm heading up the EPM advisory here at Sukaba. I have a background as controller and CFO, and then I was 20 years with Accenture, leading the finance and performance management business in the Nordics. I was also involved in different EPM roles on a global basis at Accenture.
My name is Madeleine Löfblad. I work as the Senior Solution Architect at Sukaba with the focus on the planning and forecasting area. I have a background as controller and I've also worked as a management consultant for the past 15 years.
Right, so you have in the invite, you have the introduction to this webinar, and in short we will cover planning, give some sort of perspective on planning issues many companies have, and then we will, which I will cover, and Madeleine will cover the view on the modern planning tool, and where we also will make a short demo so you have a look and feel of Hyperion planning in the cloud. In case you're not familiar with Sukaba as a firm, we are a leading Nordic full-service EPM provider. We're roughly just about 50 people. The service areas we cover is EPM advisory and technology applications based on Oracle Hyperion. As you may know, Hyperion is a market leader around EPM solutions globally. And we are a platinum partner to Oracle. So what we do is core areas in EPM, financial close and consolidation, planning and forecasting, and management reporting. Shortly on planning challenge. Well, first maybe I should introduce the agenda. So I will talk shortly around planning challenges, what is a good planning process, and tips to make planning work. And Madeleine will then give you some perspective on the modern tool. We will look at integration, which is an issue for many companies, and then give you a short demo. On planning challenges, this is something we could have many slides around, and there's been a lot of writing and thinking around planning, and it's been the case for the last 20 years. I've been working with planning since 25 years. I was CFO where we did very dynamic planning and forecasting, and we had some specific challenges, and I see many of those challenges are still present today. But we will be a little more focused and just covering all the aspects of that. So we look at time, quality, and transparency. And much of that comes from the fact that so many companies still use old ways of working to run their process, and with old ways of working I mean spreadsheets. That's what we did 20 years ago because there was nothing else. Today there are a lot of different ways of solving that, and step away from manual type of work, step away from having hundreds of spreadsheets that you have to sort of integrate together to get a full view and all of that. But still, so many are still drowning in spreadsheets, and a recent study by Oracle, they show that 75% of companies still use pretty much Excel to run their process, despite the fact that there are so many ways to get around that, to get the integration, to shorten time, to increase the quality, and get transparency throughout the corporations. So that's pretty much what we will focus on, that particular issue, because solving that issue will make so many other benefits throughout your planning process. So what is a good planning process? First of all, from my experience, having worked with this for so many years, so even if you look at planning as a specific process and a point solution, it's so important to have a holistic view of enterprise performance management and to understand where does planning fit in. I mean, it is an integrated part of a whole management process. And everything starts from strategic planning, where you set your KPIs, and based on those, you define your targets, you do your planning, and then you follow up through your reporting. All of that needs to fit together. If planning is sort of a standalone thing, it doesn't fit with the way you report, it doesn't fit with the discussion you have around your strategic direction and KPIs you set up there, it's just not going to work. So that is so very important to have a holistic view of where planning fits in, and also to define what's the purpose with planning. What do I do with the plans? What type of discussions do we want to have in our business based on the plans we do? Because depending on the purpose with planning, you will act differently. You will run the process differently. So we have come across numerous businesses where it's unclear. You do it like you always did and haven't thought it through. So that's a key aspect. Moving on to the next, some important aspects of a good planning process. There are a couple of sort of fundamental must-dos you need to consider. And one key area is you need to separate target, budget, and forecasting. Those are different processes within planning. If you mix those things up and for example, run budget as your target, you will have an issue then when it comes to forecasting, and you will, in most cases, drive a behavior that you don't want. Forecasting process is usually blurred up, and you run into politics around it. So it's a key best practice, and it's not just us preaching that. You will find it in any sort of best practice thinking around planning. So that is key. And planning is not necessarily around digging through all the details. There is sometimes a comfort in detail, but for planning, it's key to focus on what's material, what's drive the business through, what has an impact in your next couple of quarters. That's usually not specific accounts. It's more material than that. Another key area is how you look at forecasts, and a good forecast process is based on what we truly think it's going to be, an honest best guess, and it's not about what we hope it will be, because then you have the politics. You will delay all the right actions you can take much earlier if you have a process of forecasting what you think it will be. There are some key messages. Another one is use driver-based approach for planning. By doing that, you will tie it to strategy, because that's where you set those KPIs. You will enable calculation based on those drivers, and you will also get the ability to simulate. It's a very important aspect of more efficient planning, or more automation in your planning process. The third thing is around tools and technology. Obviously, that's an important aspect, and we'll come to that later in the presentation. But having you may have the world's best process thought through and everything, but if you don't have a tool, it will be very difficult to implement that process and sustain it. You may, for a short time, while you implement the tool, do it some sort of a manual way, use Excel, but over time, if you don't have the support from a tool, you're not going to be able to sustain the process. And we've seen that in many cases happening. You kind of drift back to the old ways of working. The other aspect of a tool is that it in itself, it wouldn't solve the problem. If you don't have thought through the way you work, the practices you will apply in your planning process. So the tool itself is not the solution. You need to think through the way you work. So don't implement just as is in your tool. Think through the way you want to work, and then a tool will make a lot of difference. A couple of tips based on experience how to make planning work. One thing is really to establish and communicate the target picture for the new process, and also how it fits and align in your entire EPM framework. And the key thing is to answer the questions why, what, and how, because then you cover pretty much all the aspects of that. Sponsorship is always important, and so it is here as well. Another thing around sponsorship is also to communicate and train your management and the board about a new process, because this always comes up to that level. It's always discussed in the board meetings around this. And if they're starting to ask the wrong questions and look at the old ways you used to plan, it's just not going to work. If you're finding a more dynamic way of planning and then ask, okay, how are we against budget? You kind of lost it. Be practical. There are lots of good planning concepts out there beyond budgeting, rolling forecastings, and tons of other stuff. But take a practical approach. Most of these concepts are thought through, good ideas. It's not necessarily that they will work in your company. So pick the best things in all of these and have a very practical approach. Don't be theoretical. It never works. And make sure that the new way of working is simple, fast, and stripped from politics. And also focus on material thing, what matters. So you have the sort of key areas that drives your business and applies in your forecasts. And obviously use a tool like we covered that will enable and automate the process. And when you use a tool, make sure that you have a view on the full architecture for your EPM. So it fits with your reporting and it fits with your data sources and everything. So it's not rocket science, but it's important to have that view, so you know where things fit, where you get the data, how it aligns to the full picture. And if you approach a planning project, make sure it doesn't become an IT project, because then it's not going to work. Anything around EPM, it's the same. It's not IT projects. It's so much interactive, iterative around the business. So you can't just define your requirements, and that's just a challenge in itself. But trying to define your requirements and then sending it over to IT, go ahead and build. That's a road to failure. So make sure finance, controlling, FP&A owns the process and the project. And if you look at how a typical project would look, you define your target picture, you make some initial design principles, and then it's very iterative how you build and implement the tool throughout the project, because you do most of the design as you go. So that's a key aspect of a planning project. I think next we are moving into the application we mentioned initially, and Madeleine here is going to take you through that part of the presentation. So Madeleine, please.
Thank you, Jan. The first thing I like to mention is around the benefits of a tool. Jan just mentioned there are several factors to success of sort of an EPM project. It's not only focusing on process, but it's also focusing on tool, and the other way around, which we also have experience from, that just implementing a tool is not the road to success either. So it all needs to come together. But why would you then want to have a tool? Well, first of all, one of the major aspects is, of course, time. It gives you a much quicker process of collecting the data, being able to spin around the process, eliminate the manual work, and really releasing time for other tasks like analysis and so on. Quality is also one important aspect. Quality in terms of really one version of the truth. You know the figures, they are in the system, and you always have sort of the aggregated figure as well for your whole group. That also relates to transparency. At each time you actually change something in the system, in the tool, it will aggregate in all levels. So that means that if you view the full group or if you view lower levels, you will have complete transparency, and it will all be kept together, which you see is one of sort of the major problems by using Excel, where you can't really trust the figures. You have them in disparate sheets, maybe not the latest version and so on. In a tool, you will know you are on the latest version. That also relates then to process control. Talking about versions, process control really allows the organization to be sure that all the figures are in the system and that they've been processed by sort of the right people. And once they are in, you also know that they are being locked and able to be viewed as a whole. Another strength, of course, with the planning tool is standardization. Just relating to the problem that Jan just mentioned as well, of even though you set a new process, you start working differently. If you stay in Excel or in spreadsheets, you can still get the problem that business areas or people start sort of moving the wrong way, building up their own models again. So standardization will actually keep this sort of process together, and sort of being an enabler for people to work in a similar way. And it also kind of transfers knowledge, of course, within the organization, that everyone does the same tasks and you keep sort of the driver-based model together. A tool can still also be scalable. I guess that comes down to Excel as well. But something you don't really consider just talking about the planning process is that it also improves the reporting. It's really sort of an enabler for what we call it sort of a BI-light solution, but it enables sort of management reporting in an easier way as well. So this is to visualize then how a tool can help sort of connect also the strategy with the operational views. Also the simplicity of a tool. So and it also gives you a way of sort of modeling, doing all the predictions and what if scenarios that could be needed. As Jan mentioned, we in Sukaba work with the Oracle and the Hyperion sort of enterprise planning tools. I wanted to give you a chance to visualize how a modern planning tool looks like. And my example is then from the enterprise planning and budgeting cloud solution. So if you look at the bottom of this page, you see a traditional planning solution as they've looked for about the previous 15 years. This is of like a cube-based solution. It's a classic Lego box. It's an open framework, so it's open for custom build. So really you can adjust this type of solution to any need you might have in your business, and it will give you sort of functionality that will support that. But the trends we're seeing in the market now is that we're moving towards more pre-configured frameworks or apps or modules. This is also something that Oracle has done with the Hyperion application. So what we see here is a cloud solution with the financial planning, pre-configured framework, also for workforce and compensation planning, capital and projects. And the reason why I have this analogy with Lego is to get the understanding is that what you get here is that when you buy or get the financial planning, it's like buying a Lego city box. It comes with all the pieces you need to configure or build up the whole city box, but you can still use all your classic pieces and change, remove, enhance, enrich, and sort of customize the solution anyway. So it really just gives you a great platform of best practice functionality within each type of planning process. So really just taking on someone else's best practice thinking into your own business and making sort of the best use out of that. And in sort of real terms, that means that you get something like this. You get ready processes, starts with dashboards for easy analysis reporting, still enable for adjustments, enrichments, thinking now the Lego Classic box again, where you can just customize this in any way you want. That's the foundation. You get drivers and KPIs, calculations, forms, reports, and so on, as a really good starting point to your processes. It also allows for sort of increment and enablement, so you activate whatever functionality that is needed to start with, and then you can scale it up to actually take on more functionality. So as I said, it's possible to enrich and change in any way. And it's also just automatically upgraded. So you're always on the latest versions. It also, a modern tool also supports sort of different ways of producing your plan and budget data. So the three major principles, like John mentioned, driver-based planning, driver-based accounts, comes with sort of out-of-the-box configured drivers and calculations that will allow you to drive your sort of P&L line items, for example. One major strength that I see, and which is a principle we often see with clients used in Excel, is the trend-based planning. So it's really looking at how did my P&L or balance sheet, for that matter, look like historically. Maybe seasonal trends, averages, and so on, and then just looking at increasing those values in the future. So this can be sort of heavily used on certain line items where you think it's a steady increase or decrease, or also used in target setting as well, to say historically we had we look like this, but we know we need to raise revenue by, for example, 5% and so on. And it also, of course, supports any type of manual planning and budgeting, so just inputting manually on certain line items. This is to just give you an idea about how the driver-based planning look like and the pre-built sort of calculations. This is a live example of what comes out of the box in the Hyperion solution. It's a KPI tree for gross profit. For example, looking at product revenue being calculated as a volume times sort of the average selling price. So how do we then think? We looked at sort of approaching an EPM or a planning project as a whole before, And this is just to give an example of how would you approach this type of modern tool. And from our experience and our point of view, it's good to maybe start small in just getting to know the tool and making sort of the foundation work by just setting up, so doing this sort of iterative and incremental by setting up sort of the standards at first. For instance, beginning with just doing trend-based planning, and making sure process control, workflows, integration to data sources and so on is up and running, getting to know the application, and then maybe moving on to doing more sort of complex calculations and driver-based planning. However, it's all there, it's all supported, so it's a matter of how far you are into setting your process as well. It's always are supported. But I think from what we've said from experience is if you try to grasp too much in the beginning, it's also easy to forget the basics, like making sure your data is in order and that the process and process control is in order, to focus too much on a complex sort of solution when it comes to drivers. Because definitely what we've seen, it takes time to understand and getting to know what really drives your business. So that can also be an iterative process, of course, that you need to work with your planning model continuously. One thing that we've been sort of clear for us that works with modern tool is that a tool like this always comes with sort of an out-of-the-box also integration solution. That might not be so clear when you look at it from the side. So I wanted with this picture just visualize and illustrate how a cloud solution like this comes with a full sort of integration tool called data management. So you have the ability to connect sources in an easy matter, either manually or automatically. So it's a sort of pre-built framework for many ERPs. And that sort of helps you manage sort of all your source data and get that into the planning tool. What that also gives you is, of course, the ability to pull in more detail. Jan talked about how to focus on the material things in planning. But since you have the integration tool, you can still pull in details to use them in the way of just driving the plan and focusing the drivers on the more material matters. It also allows you to drill back data, and it also sort of the solution also then comes with what we before mentioned as BI Lite, which is here visualized as Smart View, but it comes with dashboards and Office add-ins and the ability to do management reporting and ad hoc analysis. Just to get the understanding of the integration as well is that it comes with a sort of an easy user interface. So integration does not need to be an IT issue anymore. It's more of can be owned by the controllers themselves or the accountants, to make sure that you can visualize how you actually pull in the data and how you map them in the system. So that means that the integration and the mappings can be owned by finance as well, instead of IT. So that was more from a presentation point of view. And just to get a bit of a touch and feel for what a modern tool can look like nowadays, I just wanted to give you a short demo. So what a tool like this does is that you log on by a URL, which means that you can log on using, what I'm using here is I'm using a computer, but you can at the same time log on using a like iPad or phone or another type of device. So what you see on the screen almost looks like what you use in the phone by apps. It shows you processes. In this case, my activated processes is financials, projects, capital and workforce. Also, of course, all types of sort of admin support, and links to Academy, which is like online help for the application. Each process, this is like a cluster, call them cards, is that comes with sub-processes. This case, revenue planning, expense planning, balance sheet and cash flow, and then of course an analysis bit. Good to mention is that within or between each of the processes, it's fully integrated. So if you create a plan on projects, so project planning, those expenses are pushed into financial planning as well. Same with CapEx and compensation planning that is done in workforce. So if we then look at revenue planning, so you open up each sort of sub-process, it always starts with a dashboard that allows for you to do analysis and get a quick view. Can be viewed on sort of sub-entity or just total entity. So it comes to your sort of entity structure in your company. And in the dashboard, you also have ability to compare. In this case, is forecast and plan data. Or like over here, you also see scenarios like actual, forecast and plan for different years. Scenarios fully flexible to adjust to whatever scenario might be relevant, like a target scenario, long-term plan, or whatever suits you best. All of the dashboards are also drillable, and they can be changed into like this column or pie or whatever it looks best for your business. Can also then view KPIs or put in tables in dashboards. Tool also supports, we talked about the three main principles of how you create data. Supports driver-based planning. In this case, we look at revenue by product and market. These dimensions, as they're called, can be adjusted and customized to suit the need. In this case, it's a product-based company, so it's product and market. And we looked before at the KPI tree example I had, and this shows, for instance, volume, average price by trend. So I've actually set a trend on those, adjusted them, and the system calculates a new driver value. The drivers are then, of course, used to drive my P&L. So in this case, to calculate my product revenue. What we're looking at here is just the out-of-box functionality, out-of-box forms and accounts. And they can be fully sort of adjusted and renamed, and also remove accounts that is not applicable for your business. once sort of calculated, you can of course view them in a normal sort of P&L type of look and feel by comparing with other scenarios. System then of course also supports direct entry, which means you actually manually type in the values by line item. Same principle in the P&L, so for revenue, expense, also of course goes for balance sheet and cash flow. Whereas you can decide how the balance sheet is calculated or if it should be just manually based. So that was, I would say, a really sort of quick look and feel to how a modern tool would look like nowadays. This was an example of sort of Hyperion planning and cloud solution. And yeah, that's what we sort of wanted to give you today. I'm gonna sort of hand over to Jan just to close up our session.
Thank you, Madeleine. And just to summarize and wrap things up before we end the session. So planning is a very important process for decision making in any company. Unfortunately, it's too often a broken process. There are all sorts of issues that prevents companies from making the right decisions in time. It's you see that's political. It's non-realistic. Forecasts are focused on we wish this would happen rather than we think this would happen. It's a cumbersome, detailed, and time-consuming process in many cases. So what we recommend is to establish a process based on a target picture for EPM that answers the questions why, what, and how, what we mentioned initially here. Simplify, speed up, and manage the process, and use a modern tool to do that, and reduce the dependency on Excel. We're not saying you shouldn't use Excel, because it is a useful tool, but don't run the whole process on it. And then again, as Madeleine mentions, this particular tool, Hyperion ePBCS, can also be used for management reporting and BI purposes. So it's actually it's a very useful tool, and it's something that is very quickly established in a company. Which, given it's a cloud-based solution, it's about months, not years, that you get this up and working within your business. So thank you for joining. I hope you thought it was useful and interesting. Thank you for today.
Thank you.